Hi everybody! Today I'm going to be filming a short introduction video explaining my story with my eating disorder that I struggled with for a number of years. I'm planning on filming a little mini series of these videos getting into some additional information regarding eating disorders, recovery, tips to manage it in more of an unconventional way, or in the absence of a treatment center or a treatment plan. First of all, I'm just going to give an overview of my personal journey with my eating disorder, and I will save the additional information as well as tips for a full recovery. So right now I am 25 years old. So my eating disorder started when I was 15 going on 16 years old. So it was the summer right before grade 11 started. And it started in one of the most common ways I've heard. It started with me going on a diet without knowing anything about nutrition, anything about my body, or anything about what I was doing. Prior to being 15 years old, I had never thought twice about my body. I'd never thought twice about food or nutrition or my body image. Something about the summer when I turned 16 flipped a bit of a switch inside of me where it felt like I looked down at myself for the very first time and really didn't like what I saw. I think a combination of quitting all forms of physical activity that were presently in my life, as well as my dad moving away to another country, and just being bored in the house during the summer with not a lot to do and dealing with a lot of sad emotions that I really didn't have the resources to deal with. So I looked down at myself and I noticed that I had gained a little bit of weight. My belly was protruding outwards in a way that I had never really noticed before. So I decided to put myself on a crash diet where I was eating, I would say, pretty close to nothing, and the weight fell off very rapidly. Once I started to notice these really rapid results, I became very quickly addicted to the high that came with seeing such quick visual results and the excitement of something new. So my very quick unhealthy results fueled a desire to keep going. I started counting calories. I would overestimate the calories in everything. So by the end of the day, what I thought I had eaten and what I truly had eaten were very different from one another. So in reality, I was really not consuming very many calories at all. I wasn't trying to harm myself and I wasn't trying to harm my body. I was just 15 going on 16 years old, and I really didn't know very much. I thought that I was doing the right thing at the time, and any attempts from family or friends to express concern or question me on the safety of my exercise regimen and my low intake of food, any attempts from family and friends to confront me on this was met with a lot of hostility, because in my malnourished mind, I felt like they were trying to rip away from me the only thing that I had under my control, which was the extreme diet that I was on. I ended up having to go into the hospital because I hadn't had a bowel movement in almost a week, and I was convinced that I had a bowel obstruction or I was severely constipated to the point where I needed medical intervention. I had taken multiple different brands of laxatives. I had taken suppositories and enemas, and I still had not had a bowel movement. So I ended up going to the emergency room, fully convinced that my intestines were backed up, when in reality, the doctors said that I did not have a single speck of anything in my intestines. It's not that I was constipated, I had nothing inside me at all. So they said that if I wanted to have a bowel movement, I would need to consume food first. These x-rays taken in the emergency room was the first major sign that got the ball rolling on my parents' end that something was seriously wrong, because after exiting the hospital, I still would not consume an amount of food that was large enough to actually fuel my body, let alone enough for me to actually be creating waste and using the washroom normally. So my extreme diet, I'm using the word diet because I wasn't aware that I had an eating disorder at the time. My diet went on for a couple more months until I had lost so much weight and I was mentally so starved. My behavior had become so erratic, and my thought processes and the way that I was speaking was just so out of touch with reality. And I think that was largely due to malnutrition and also just due to being a young teenager with not a lot of correct information and a very strong will, dealing with a lot of pain that was going completely unaddressed. A couple months later, my parents were very concerned about me and they put me in a treatment plan called the Maudsley approach, or the Maudsley method, Maudsley for Maudsley. I believe that the program was developed in the UK, but I could be wrong about that. The point of the Maudsley method is for families so that their child or spouse can recover at home as opposed to in a hospital setting or in a treatment facility. The gist of the Maudsley method is your caregivers, your parents, your grandparents, or in some situations, your spouse is responsible for your food intake as well as your recovery. I won't get into the nutrition plan or the calorie goals or any of that stuff that was involved in the logistics of the Maudsley approach, but I was eating 10 times more food than I was used to because my parents were preparing my breakfast, lunch, dinner, 3 snacks a day, and monitoring my physical activity and exercise, making sure that I was not exerting myself in any way, and making sure that I was eating either a meal or a snack with a calorie minimum every 2 to 3 hours. So I very, very quickly regained all of the weight that I had lost over those few months within a matter of three to 4 weeks. After that, I actually overshot and gained even more weight than I had ever even intended on losing in the first place. So going into the Maudsley method, I fought my parents, fought the doctors, fought the psychologists, and fought myself every step of the way. I was already feeling like the only friend, tool, companion, coping mechanism I had, which was dieting, had been taken away from me. And I was truly convinced that all of the adults in my life got some sort of a sick pleasure out of seeing me suffer. I totally didn't understand the fact that people were trying to help me and trying to look out for my well-being. In my distorted version of reality, my diet and my extreme weight loss was my first attempt at claiming my own adult identity, and they're even taking that away. So I felt very upset, very alone, very helpless, and like I had absolutely nothing left to lose. So I decided to just start eating the meals, start eating the snacks, start lying to my therapist and pretending like everything was okay just so that I could get the hell out of the Maudsley method and go back to my old ways again. So I ended up faking it pretty well over the next few months. I gained back all of the weight and I tried not to let anyone believe that I was as devastated as I was about that. A few months went by, and in the following school year, in the 12th grade, I had gained enough trust back in my parents, enough trust back in my psychologist, and enough trust back in my doctors that I was medically stable, mentally stable, and generally okay, which was very, very far from the case. The first opportunity that I got to relapse, I took it. And the second time around, the only difference was I had learned more tips and tricks along the way to conceal my eating disorder. I had learned to lie a lot better, and I had learned to fall into a false identity where I was able to convince people that I was a level of okay that I had never actually been. I ended up losing even more weight than I did before the 11th grade, before I was put into the Maudsley treatment the first time. The second time around, I lost as much weight. The only difference was I was eating slightly more than the first time around, so people weren't as concerned. The weight was falling off a little bit more slowly than it did the first time, so people were a bit less concerned about that. And I seemed a lot more mentally stable, a lot less erratic in my speech and in my behavior, just simply because I learned that if I acted that way and if I spoke that way, there would be consequences that I didn't like. So I learned to stifle myself, to lie, and to hide from reality. After a few months went by and I was clearly, visibly very thin, and it was evident that I was not eating a substantial amount, my parents and family slowly became increasingly concerned again. This was the first time that I started to become sick and tired of my own ways, and I started to go see a therapist at school, in addition to the psychologist I was already seeing for my relationship with food. This therapist I saw at school was one of the first steps I took to actually wanting to get better from a place in my own heart and in my own mind, as opposed to just appeasing family and friends, keeping their opinions at bay and for long enough. As the course of grade 12, my final year in high school, went on, I entered my very first romantic relationship that I had ever been in. I think it was a combination of being preoccupied with something new and exciting. I had never been romantic with anybody. I had never been intimate with anybody before. So the thrill of a new experience, in combination with getting older, getting to know myself a little bit better, and starting to set my sights on things a little bit bigger than high school, such as post-secondary education, friendships, relationships outside of school. My world became a little bit bigger, and so my desire to stay small started to morph a little bit. I ended up eating more, I ended up putting on weight, and I ended up seeing slowly that the world wouldn't actually end, and didn't actually end if I were to put on weight. One aspect that I found devastating at the time, but was actually quite catalytic in my recovery, is realizing that my peers, people who didn't really know me, like my acquaintances at school, my peers, my teachers, literally didn't notice. They saw me go, they saw my weight go up and down and up and down and up and down, and they didn't even think twice. They didn't even notice, which made me realize that it's not all about me. The entire world is not actually looking at me and passing judgments. Literally nobody cares but me. And I found that equally offensive and exhilarating, the realization that it's literally not all about me. Most people do not care how much I weigh, how much I've eaten that day, and what I look like. High school graduation came and went. Around this time, I became focused on gaining muscle, gaining strength, and going to the gym. I think that I framed my new interest in fitness and working out and gaining muscle and gaining strength and weightlifting as a step in the right direction of recovery, when in reality, I think it was just a different shade of the same color of being unwell. I became very obsessed with fitness, very obsessed with working out, very obsessed with tracking my calories and my macronutrients, and the eating disorder was just as prevalent and just as monopolizing in my life and monopolizing in my mind as it ever was. The focus had just shifted from getting smaller to gaining muscle. It wasn't until I was about 20 years old, so a couple years had passed after high school of me going to the gym every day, until I finally realized that I didn't actually like any of that. I didn't actually like what I was doing. I didn't even necessarily feel comfortable in the body, the muscular body that I was putting so much time and so much effort into building. I still felt just as unhappy. It was just a different shade of the same color of unhappy, which is when I pretty much realized that any kind of a presence in my life that caused so much anxiety and caused me to center and focus my life, my schedule, my relationships, my plans, my thoughts, my behavior, just center and focus it all around this presence in my life. It was just robbing so much out of me. I needed to completely take the focus off of food, off of fitness, and just focus on who I am as a person, the things that bring me joy, the things I'm passionate about, the things I want to learn about that have absolutely nothing to do with weightlifting and with food. And it wasn't until I decided to just move on with my life, to just move on, that I actually started to get over my eating disorder for real. And now, 10 years later, I would say that even though I still struggle from time to time with bad body image thoughts, I would say that it does not even compare to the type of dialogue that used to run through my mind on a regular basis. I think it's pretty normal, especially for women, to sometimes get down on themselves, especially as our hormones fluctuate during our menstrual cycle. So I would say that some of these negative thoughts are somewhat human and somewhat normal, but in terms of going above and beyond the scope of normalcy into self-talk that is borderline abusive has not been an issue for me in a matter of years. It has not been an issue for me since I decided to just let it go, let the gym go, let the calorie counting go, just live my life as if that stuff never even existed. And now I feel like my eating disorder is something that I can talk about, but not something that is a part of me anymore. Thank you guys so much for watching and for listening. I hope that you stay tuned for some more videos to come in this little mini series where I'll be sharing a lot of information regarding eating disorders, recovery of mind and body and heart and soul in a way that might be slightly unconventional. Thank you guys. Please stay tuned for the next videos. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Bye.